Hi, I'm so glad you're back. This is, I think, our fourth at-home session. We do 2 in September, 2 in October, and 2 in November. So I think we're officially at the halfway point. So I want to congratulate you for joining us and for staying with us this long. I hope it's been a blessing to you. And I want to challenge you to tell others what you're learning. Tell others what the Holy Spirit is revealing to you, so that you can build their faith. And also, it's awesome to be able to put into practice the things we're learning, because the Holy Spirit is pouring truth into you. One, because He wants to bless you, but He wants it to come to you so it can go through you and you can bless others and encourage others. So I hope that that's happening for you. So today we are going to talk about what's considered the incommunicable and communicable characteristics of God. Like, okay, do not fall asleep on me. Okay, do not fall asleep on me. Let me tell you a story. I was watching these videos that were made probably in the 60s or the 70s by a theologian named Francis Schaeffer. He wrote a book, How Then Shall We Live? And then he did a number of videos on the rise and fall of culture. And he went from the Roman Empire all the way to present day. And he went on to be with the Lord in the 80s. So these are old. But you can't knock 1970s Christian cinematography. It was pretty much on point. But what struck me was when I was watching these videos, I saw them back in high school, because we were studying classic literature and kind of Greco-Roman theocracies, democracies, republics, all of that jazz. And we were watching in high school, and the Lord brought it to my remembrance recently. So I found it on YouTube, because everything's on YouTube. And it's Francis Schaeffer, How Then Shall We Live? The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. And what was fascinating about his talk was that the Romans established a state, established an empire on the strength, on the will and the might of the empire itself. So that worked for them for a season. I mean, you can't knock their roads, you can't knock their military might. They controlled almost all of the known world. Their empire stretched from Rome all the way to Great Britain, Northern Africa, and then also into the Middle East. So truly a magnificent empire. But what was starkly interesting about this incredible empire was that they found that the state and the power of the state could only will the people's loyalty so far, because the people had no moral authority by which to govern their lives. The state could only take them so far. And so when the Christian church is birthed out of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, that's at the very fulcrum of Roman civilization. You guys remember, Pontius Pilate sentenced Jesus to death. So in AD 64, when Peter is writing his letters to the church and Paul is writing his letters to the church, it is the height of persecution in the early church. AD 64-65 is Nero. And you guys know Nero, Rome burned. He was a madman. And he blamed the Christians for it, because the Christians were a threat to Roman authority and power, because they derived their moral authority from something greater than the state, from an immutable, unchanging God. Because if you believe in good and evil, then there must be a moral lawgiver who helps us determine what is good and what is evil. And that was a threat to the Romans. And that's why the emperor couldn't have any competition with Jesus Christ. Now it goes on, there were other emperors who converted, and then the church became the national religion, and then that was a whole nother problem, but that was in a different video, because that was the Middle Ages. What I want to share with you, and why I share that story with you, is that your God is not like any other gods, little g. The Romans tried to put a Band-Aid on the problem they knew they had, where people had no source by which to derive moral authority. And so they created all of these gods that you and I know today. If you read any of the Percy Jackson, Athena, Perseus, Zeus was the Greek, one, Jupiter was the Roman one. They tried to create these theologies and these deities, but they were little more than just souped up humans. And the Romans couldn't get what they needed out of that. They were souped up, super flawed humans, is what their deities were. So when you and I walk through the character of God, there are things in God's character that make God God, that are reserved only to Him. There are many ways that God is making us like His Son, Jesus Christ. His faithfulness, His love, His kindness, His justice, His mercy, His love, His unchanging, all of that. God is embedding that in us to make us more and more like Jesus. But there are certain characteristics that He reserves unto Himself. I don't care how hard you try, you are never going to be invisible. I know, that was a huge blow to my kid. Owen, I remember he wanted to be a Jedi and a ninja when he grew up. And I had to break it to him that Jedis were pretend. It was devastating. It was a hard kindergarten year. But I say that to say there are some characteristics that it doesn't matter how hard you try. They are reserved unto God Himself, and that's what makes God God. And I want to share those with you because they build our faith, because we do not serve a God who was fashioned by human hands. We do not serve a God who was dreamed up by some philosopher. We do not serve a God that can be contained or willed by men. We serve a God who is God in heaven above and on earth below, and His character, the things that make Him God, give us such confidence that we have truly placed our faith exactly where it needs to be. So let's dive into some of those characteristics. Okay, here's the first one. God is infinite. This means that He is self-existing and He is without origin. There's a ton of scriptures in your app and in your notes where I'm going to back each of these up, but for the sake of time, I don't have a chance to go through each one. But when we say God is infinite, He is self-existing and He is without origin, this means that God can do all things, He has no limitation. He has no threat of scarcity because He's not depending on anything to be His source. He is the source of all things. It says it in Colossians, all things are in Him and all things are held together by Him. He is infinite. He is immeasurable. He is without beginning. He is without end. He has always been. Number 2, God is immutable. He never changes. We talked about this in God's faithfulness. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He is never going to move the goalposts on you. He is never going to wake up and have a bad day like you and I. He is unchanging, and He is the same to all men. He is not one way with me and another way with you. He is across the board, unchanging. The fancy way of saying that is immutable. Yes, SAT word just for you. God is self-sufficient. He has no needs. We touched on this before, but this is really important to break out. He is able to do immeasurably more than we could ask, seek, think, or imagine. Ephesians 3:20. He's able to do immeasurably more because He is self-sufficient and He has no needs. He does not have any kind of supply chain problems. He is God. All right, number 4, He is omnipotent. This means that He's all-powerful. Now, this would be really, really scary. An all-powerful God. He could do anything He wanted, anytime He wanted. He could smote and smoke and do whatever. But here's what's incredible about our God. His characteristics cannot cancel each other out. So yes, He's omnipotent, all-powerful, but He is also love at the same time. He's omnipotent, He's all-powerful, but He is merciful. He's omnipotent and He's all-powerful, but He's forgiving. All of those things hold His character together, and He will not take an action in being omnipotent that violates his character in another area where he's not loving, he's not merciful, he's not just, he's not good. He is omnipotent and all-powerful, but we can trust him because he's all of those other things as well. All right. He's omniscient, which means he's all-knowing. He knows everything. He has all knowledge. He knows the past, he knows the present, he knows the future. He is an expert in every field of study. He knows what you walked through. He was there. You are not going to surprise him with a thought. You are not going to surprise him with an action. He pleads with you to choose righteousness. He pleads with you to choose wisdom, but you are not going to shock him with anything in your past. He already knows it. He is omniscient. He knows all things. This is why as parents, we appeal to him all the time. This is why as a businesswoman, I appeal to him all the time. This is why as a wife and a mother, I appeal to him all the time. Because I say, Lord, I have very limited facts. My range of knowledge is very, very limited. But Father, you know all things. Nothing is hidden from your sight. You are omniscient. You know it all. Here's the final one. He is omnipresent. This means that he is everywhere. You cannot escape his mercy. You cannot escape his justice. You cannot escape his wisdom. He is all things and everywhere at the same time. Now, this bears a very good question. People ask me, why do I have to go to church? I can have church in the mountains. I can have church in nature. I can have church on the lake, hypothetically speaking. I can have church anywhere, Sarah. His presence, he's omnipresent. That is true. There is no valley that you walk through that God is not present. There is no victory that you share that he is not present. There is no pit that he is not deeper still, to quote Corey Ten Boom. But here's the deal. His manifest presence, he chooses certain places where his manifest presence can be. This is where God says, I'm going to meet my people at this appointed place at this appointed time. And that's called church. And that's what you and I get to experience on Sundays. It's sort of like an embassy. You guys know through current events that the embassy in Kabul, Afghanistan, has been abandoned. And embassies in different countries represent the United States in that country. When I travel abroad, I always register with the embassy. I don't care where I'm going. I'm going to Guatemala, I register with the embassy. I'm going to Colombia, I register with the embassy. I want to make it as easy as possible for the U.S. Marines to find me. I don't want them to have to play hide and seek. There's an earthquake, there's a mudslide, there's a coup. Fellas, this is my hotel and this is where you can find me. I'm an American, get me to the embassy. Because the embassy represents the United States in that foreign country, and I have certain rights and protections as an American citizen, and I can invoke those and plead for those on that embassy's soil, because it's like a little piece of America right there. The church is heaven's embassy on the earth. This is not our home. We are here for a very temporal time. But God has chosen his church as the embassy to the world, where they can look in and see a little bit of heaven on this square plot of ground. And then he says, hey, my manifest presence is going to be here on this day and this time, where I'm going to receive my people's praise, and I am going to impart teaching to them. I'm going to make my presence known to them. Can his presence manifest your closet? 100% yes. Can his presence be felt in the car while you're driving? Absolutely. He is omnipresent. But his manifest presence, the embassy, the church is that embassy for the world, where they can look in our windows and go, that place is different. The whole earth is shaking, but those people are unshaken. Everybody's running around trying to figure out what's going on, but those people know what's going on. That is what the church represents. So these are the immutable characteristics of God. Now I know what you're thinking. Sarah, Why we got to talk theology? Why did you have to go and ruin a perfectly good Bible study with theology and doctrine? I'll tell you why. Theology and doctrine are not bad words. They're not. In fact, theology is what keeps you and I from erring. The difference between the living gospel of Jesus Christ and a cult is somebody tinkered with the theology. And if you and I are not careful, if we do not know the truth, if we do not understand God in his immutable nature, in his incommunicable nature, then you and I will fall for something that tries to be like God, but isn't. And that's why it's really important that you and I take the time to learn the hard things. We take the time to learn the things that make a difference for you and I when we're discerning fact from fiction. I had an aunt, a great aunt, who worked at the Federal Reserve, and this is where they print the money. And they would, for weeks, only allow her to handle real currency. And then after a period of time with her training, they would try to slip in a counterfeit bill every once in a while. Well, her fingers were so accustomed to feeling true currency, legal tender, that when they tried to slip that counterfeit in there, she picked up on it immediately. If she'd not been through that process of handling what was true and legal tender, it would have been much, much more difficult for her to be able to spot the counterfeit. If you and I do not put in the hard work and learn what makes God God, it'll be very difficult for you and I when we try to spot the counterfeit down the road. I'm telling you, it's worth it. And these characteristics build my faith because I want to serve a God who is omniscient and knows everything. I want to serve a God who is omnipotent and all-powerful. I want to serve a God who is infinite. He is without measure, without beginning, and without end. I want to serve a God who is self-sufficient and not dependent on anything, because this means that I'm serving a God who is truly God and not just some souped up human. He is able to change my circumstance and navigate it. I love that Jesus, it says he was the Son of Man and the Son of God. He was fully God and fully man at the exact same time. This encourages me on 2 points. One, he was fully man, so he empathizes with me. He cried like I cry. He got hungry like I get hungry, or hangry, as it were. He had friends like I have friends. He had family drama like I got family drama. He can relate to me because we have a high priest who can relate to us. That's what the writers of Hebrews says. He was a man just like we are men. He was flesh and blood like we are flesh and blood. But I love that he is also the Son of God, which means he was sinless. And with Jesus being the Son of God, he is God. It means he can do something about me being human. He doesn't just have to empathize with me going through a hard time. He is omnipresent, omniscient, all-powerful, and infinite. He can do something about the circumstances I'm facing. That is a God worth worshiping, and that is a God worth serving. And I hope that it encourages you today to trust God for something that you haven't had the faith for before, or to not allow your human reason to box God in. He can do immeasurably more than you could ask, seek, think, or imagine. Trust me, he is God and God alone, and your faith is well put. All right, I hope that encourages you today, and I can't wait to see you back.